a familiar face on the road. The summer's oppressive heat clung to Officer Dave Miller's patrol car, seeping in despite the AC's frantic efforts. A bead of sweat traced a path down his temple as he navigated Highway 17. Another Tuesday, another lethargic afternoon, he mused, suppressing a yawn. 15 years on the force had blurred into an endless series of photocopied days, identical stretches of asphalt, predictable squabbles, and a persistent, gnawing sense of misalignment. His gaze drifted to the rearview mirror, finding his own reflection. Weary eyes, a jawline softened by time, and a perpetual furrow that etched annoyance onto his features. Suddenly, a sapphire blur ripped through the monotony. A sleek, expensive sedan, undeniably late model, annihilated the distance between them as if Dave's vehicle were rooted to the spot. His hand instinctively found the radar gun, 92 in a 65 zone. Definitely not stationary. A grim satisfaction tightened his lips. Finally, a spark of purpose. He hit the lights and siren, their urgent wail slicing through the afternoon quiet. The blue car, after a beat of hesitation, began to yield, its brake lights glowing a deep crimson. Dave pulled in behind, the shimmering heat dancing off the asphalt. Dispatch. Initiating a traffic stop. Highway 17, just past the county line. Blue sedan, California plates. He approached the driver's side, his hand resting casually on his holstered sidearm. Standard protocol, a shield against the unknown. As he drew closer, he recognized the car's pedigree wasn't just expensive, it exuded an understated power, a quiet confidence. The tinted windows offered no clues until he reached the door, which descended with a smooth, almost silent hum. Then time seemed to ripple and fold. Behind the wheel sat a man, immaculately clad in a crisp, dark suit. His posture was ramrod straight, hands resting serenely on the steering wheel. He turned his head, and their eyes locked. Dave's breath snagged. The world tipped on its axis. The oppressive warmth, the low thrum of his patrol car, even the roadside crickets, all receded into a distant drone. His jaw went slack. It couldn't be. The man's face bore the subtle etchings of experience and wisdom, but those eyes were unmistakable. Intelligent, steady, and as piercing as Dave remembered. A quiet, almost imperceptible smile played on the man's lips. Officer, the man's voice, a rich baritone, was completely unruffled. Is there a problem? Dave could only gape. A problem? The problem was, the man calmly regarding him was Michael Thompson. Not just any Michael Thompson, but the Michael Thompson. The kid from school. The one he tormented relentlessly, whose glasses he'd snapped, whose books he'd scattered, whose quiet dignity he'd tried so hard to dismantle. The smart kid, the one who always seemed to grasp more, perceive more, even back then. A flush, hotter than the afternoon sun, scorched Dave's face. Shame, sharp and sudden, clawed at his gut. Memories vivid and unwelcome cascaded through his mind. Michael's shy smile before Dave's shove, his persistent efforts to avoid confrontation, his unwavering focus in class even as Dave's taunts echoed around him. Dave had been a loud, insecure bully, all bluster and thinly veiled anger. Michael had been Michael, calm, resilient, and utterly beyond Dave's reach, even when Dave had tried his hardest to pull him down. Dave swallowed, his throat suddenly parched. His voice emerged as a rough croak. Do you know why I pulled you over, sir? He couldn't force Michael's name past his lips. Not yet. The formality felt like a flimsy shield against the past. Michael's smile broadened slightly, a knowing glint in his eyes. I have a feeling I might, he said, his gaze unwavering, devoid of accusation or bitterness, only quiet acknowledgement. I believe I was going a bit over the speed limit. A bit? Dave's mind raced. He had to maintain professionalism. He was a police officer. This was a traffic stop. But the ghost of his younger, crueler self stood right beside him, pointing an accusatory finger. This wasn't just some random speeder. This was Michael. Michael, who looked as if time had only polished him, save for the dignified silver at his temples. Michael, who was clearly thriving. Indeed, sir, Dave managed, his voice still hoarse. He cleared his throat. 92 in a 65 zone, that's quite significant. A bizarre mix of professional obligation and profound personal discomfort churned within him. His radar gun felt weighted, a flimsy prop in a play he hadn't rehearsed. Michael nodded slowly. "My apologies, officer. I was a bit preoccupied. It won't happen again." His tone was polite, firm, and entirely devoid of any attempt to leverage their shared past or his apparent status to sway the situation. Dave found himself staring at Michael's hands on the steering wheel. They were strong, capable hands, the kind that might build empires or command respect. His childhood self, the loudmouth kid, felt suddenly microscopic, shrinking within Dave's uniform. All the bravado, all the quick judgments he often made on the job, evaporated under Michael's calm, steady gaze. He felt exposed, stripped bare, and profoundly, irrevocably ashamed. This was no routine traffic stop. This was a reckoning, the unexpected reveal. "Officer Miller," Michael stated, his smooth baritone devoid of accusation, holding only a quiet acknowledgement. His dark, intelligent eyes flickered to Dave's name tag. A faint, almost imperceptible smile played on Michael's lips, a knowing curve that instantly chilled Dave. It wasn't malicious or triumphant, but a subtle recognition, like rediscovering a forgotten bookmark. Dave's hand, already trembling from the evening chill, now shook with a visceral tremor that blurred the citation pad. He fumbled with the pen, its cheap plastic impossibly slick against his suddenly clammy skin. The sedan's opulent interior, once merely expensive, now felt heavy, suffocating. Michael's steady, unwavering gaze seemed to dissect him, not with judgment, but an unsettling clarity. "License and registration," Dave croaked, his voice alien even to himself. He averted his gaze, focusing on the pristine leather of the steering wheel, the polished chrome accents, anything to escape that unnerving presence. Michael reached into the glove compartment with unhurried grace, retrieving the documents. His movements were fluid, confident, a stark contrast to Dave's awkwardness. As he handed them over, their fingers brushed. Michael's touch was cool, dry, and brief, yet it felt like a static shock. Dave forced his gaze to the driver's license. Michael Thompson. The name swam before his eyes, a ghost from a past he desperately tried to bury. The ID photo, a younger, slightly leaner Michael, still held the same piercing intelligence in its eyes. A cold sweat beaded on Dave's forehead despite the cool night air. The familiar knot of shame tightened in his gut, a constant companion since that fateful schoolyard day. He began to write, his pen scratching hesitantly. The fine, the date, the vehicle information, each stroke felt like an accusation, not just against Michael, but against himself. His hand shook so violently the letters blurred into an illegible scrawl. He pressed harder, trying to steady it, but the pen felt impossibly heavy. "Officer Miller," Michael's voice sliced through the silence, calm as a windless lake. "Is everything all right?" Dave flinched, nearly dropping the pad. He risked a quick glance at Michael, whose expression held genuine concern, no hint of old animosity. This only deepened Dave's discomfort. He preferred anger, resentment, anything but this quiet, understanding empathy. "Fine," Dave mumbled, his voice hoarse. "Just long shift." He avoided Michael's eyes again, focusing on the speedometer, a number that seemed to mock his distress. Michael nodded slowly, his gaze still fixed on Dave. "It can be. A demanding job, being on the force." He paused, then continued, his voice softer, with an undercurrent that prickled the hairs on Dave's arms. "I understand the pressures, the dedication it takes." Dave just grunted, desperate to finish and escape. Blood thrummed in his ears, a frantic drumbeat against the sedan's quiet hum. He scribbled the last details, his signature a barely decipherable squiggle. "Well, Mr. Thompson, here's your ticket," Dave said, holding it out, his hand still quivering. "Please try to obey the speed limit." Michael took the ticket, their fingers brushing again. This time, he held the paper's edge a moment longer than necessary. His gaze met Dave's, and that small, knowing smile returned, a shade more pronounced. "Thank you, Officer Miller," Michael said, his voice clear and resonant. He folded the ticket neatly, placing it on the passenger seat. Then he leaned back, relaxed yet radiating an undeniable authority. "Before you go, there's something I should tell you." Dave's heart hammered. He braced himself, expecting an angry outburst, a dredging up of old grievances, anything but the calm assertion that followed. "I start my new position on Monday," Michael continued, his eyes unwavering, "as the new chief of police." The words hung in the air, heavy and impossible. Dave's hand, clutching his pen, went slack. The pen slipped from his nerveless fingers, clattering against the asphalt with a sharp, echoing sound in the sudden, profound silence. He stared at Michael, mouth agape, the world tilting on its axis. Streetlights blurred into streaks of white and gold. The distant city hum faded to a dull roar. Michael Thompson, the quiet, bullied kid from school, the new chief. The irony, the sheer mind-bending impossibility of it, slammed into Dave with the force of a physical blow. He felt utterly, completely undone. A sleepless night of regret. The digital glow of the radar gun seemed to mock Dave as Michael Thompson, with that unnervingly placid smile, took the ticket. The crisp white paper, now defaced with Dave's scrawl, felt like a warrant for his own undoing. Michael's gaze, unblinking and devoid of any lingering resentment, settled on him. "See you at work, Officer Miller," he said, his voice a low, even hum that vibrated with an implicit meaning only Dave seemed to perceive. Then, with a casual nod, Michael climbed back into his sleek black sedan, its engine purring almost silently as it pulled away from the curb, leaving Dave alone under the indifferent streetlights. The air, which had been perfectly mild moments before, suddenly felt cold and thin. Dave stood there, the radar gun heavy in his hand, watching the tail lights disappear into the urban sprawl. His stomach churned, a sour, acidic wave of nausea rising in his throat. "See you at work." The words echoed in his skull, each syllable a hammer blow against the fragile edifice of his carefully constructed life. He felt a profound sense of foreboding, a premonition of imminent collapse. The drive home was a blur of flashing neon and the dull thrum of the patrol car's engine. He barely registered the late-night diners or the solitary figures walking dogs. His mind was a tangled knot of dread and a burgeoning, unfamiliar guilt. He fumbled with his keys at the front door, his hand shaking slightly. The silence of his small apartment was usually a comfort, a balm after a long shift. Tonight it felt suffocating, amplifying the frantic rhythm of his own heartbeat. He shed his uniform mechanically, the heavy fabric feeling like a shroud. A shower did nothing to wash away the creeping dread. He tried to eat, but the thought of food made his stomach revolt. Finally, he gave up and collapsed onto his bed, the sheets cool against his clammy skin. Sleep, however, was a cruel joke. The moment his eyes closed, the mental reel began to play, a morbid highlight reel of his past. It wasn't the usual benign nostalgia that sometimes accompanied late-night reflections. This was an inquisition. His mind, unbidden, dredged up every petty cruelty, every sneering remark, every shove in the hallway. He remembered Michael Thompson from elementary school, a quiet kid with thick glasses and an earnest, slightly bewildered expression. Dave, a head taller and fueled by a restless energy he'd never understood, had found Michael an easy target. The way Michael flinched when Dave's shadow fell over him, the way his voice wavered when he tried to answer a teacher's question, the way he always seemed to be carrying a stack of books too big for his small frame. It had all been fodder for Dave's adolescent cruelty. There was the incident in the locker room, the forgotten gym shorts, and Michael's mortified face when Dave had pointed and laughed, drawing the attention of the entire football team. Then there was the infamous science fair project, painstakingly crafted, only to be accidentally knocked over by Dave and his buddies, scattering gears and wires across the gym floor. Michael hadn't cried, not outwardly. He'd just looked at the wreckage, then at Dave, with an expression that held a depth of sorrow and disappointment far beyond his years. Dave had dismissed it then, basking in the fleeting approval of his peers. Now, that look haunted him, burning into his memory like a brand. He remembered the endless taunts about Michael's stutter, the way Dave would mimic his hesitant speech, drawing snickers from their classmates. The time he'd stolen Michael's lunch money, leaving him hungry for the day, only to spend it on candy for himself. Each memory was a fresh stab of shame, a testament to a monstrous version of himself he preferred to believe no longer existed. He tossed and turned, the mattress springs groaning under his restless weight. The clock on his bedside table glowed a relentless red. 1:47 a.m., then 2:32 a.m., then 3:05 a.m. The house was utterly silent, save for the frantic beat of his own heart. He tried to rationalize it, to tell himself it was just kid stuff, harmless pranks. But the truth, raw and undeniable, was that he had been a bully. He had deliberately sought to inflict pain, to diminish another human being for his own petty amusement. And now, that human being, the quiet kid with the thick glasses, was going to be his boss. The sheer, terrifying irony of it all was almost unbearable. He imagined Michael, seated at the chief's desk, the same calm, knowing expression on his face. He pictured himself having to report to him, to take orders, to look into those eyes that had once held such vulnerability and now held something far more unsettling. Quiet authority. Fear gnawed at him. Fear of retribution, yes, but more profoundly, fear of facing the mirror Michael Thompson now held, up to his own past. He closed his eyes, but the darkness behind his eyelids was filled with Michael's calm, knowing smile. The night stretched on, an interminable expanse of regret and dread, a sleepless vigil for the man he had once been, and the man he was about to face. The first day under new leadership. The precinct's briefing room hummed under the fluorescent lights, casting an unsparing, almost sterile glow on the assembled officers. A familiar knot tightened in Dave's stomach, a cold, clammy sensation that had clung to him since the previous night. Sleep had been a mirage, Michael's calm, knowing eyes replaying on a relentless loop behind his eyelids. Now, slumped in a plastic chair at the rear, Dave stared intently at the scuffed linoleum, acutely aware of the hushed murmurs and restless shifts around him. The air was thick with a blend of anticipation and raw curiosity. Chief Michael Thompson's appointment had blindsided many, a swift, almost stealthy transition that left the rank and file buzzing with theories. Dave, however, knew the true source of his profound unease. This wasn't merely about a new chief. It was about his past, now seated squarely at the head of the table. Sergeant Elena Rodriguez, usually a paragon of stoic professionalism, subtly twirled her pen. Her dark eyes, typically so incisive, darted across the room, gauging the collective mood of her team. For a fleeting second, her gaze snagged on Dave's averted face, a flicker of something unreadable in her expression before she turned away. Officer Ben Carter, ever the optimist, leaned forward, a wide, eager grin plastered across his features. "Exciting, right, Dave?" he whispered, nudging Dave's arm. "Fresh perspective, new strategies. Could be a real boom for the department." Dave grunted, his voice elusive. He could feel the peripheral awareness of other officers, a subtle acknowledgement of his unusual silence. Typically, he joined the morning banter, a practiced habit to blend in, to mask the creeping disillusionment with his job, his life. But today, the charade felt utterly impossible. A sudden hush descended as the front door swung open. Chief Michael Thompson strode in, his presence immediately authoritative. Not a physically imposing man, he nonetheless carried himself with an innate command that drew every eye. His uniform was impeccable, creases razor sharp, brass gleaming. He moved with a quiet self-assurance that spoke volumes of purpose and control. Dave watched him from the corner of his vision, a fresh wave of dread washing over him. Michael looked older, of course, the boyish roundness of his face now chiseled with sharper angles, a hint of weariness around his eyes that belied his calm demeanor. But those eyes, those same penetrating eyes, were unmistakable. Michael took his place at the podium, a simple, unadorned stand that somehow amplified his presence. He surveyed the room, his gaze sweeping over each officer in silent acknowledgement before he began. His voice, when it came, was measured, clear, and resonant, carrying effortlessly to every corner. "Good morning, everyone," Michael began, his tone even. "I appreciate you all being here. This is our first official meeting under new leadership, and I wanted to take this opportunity to lay out some foundational principles. He paused, letting his words hang in the air, allowing the gravitas of his position to settle. Our work here, as law enforcement officers, is fundamentally about service. It's about protecting our community, upholding the law, and ensuring justice for all citizens, Michael continued, his gaze steady. But beyond the duties outlined in our job descriptions, there are core values that must guide us. Values like integrity, accountability, and courage. Dave felt a prickle of sweat on his brow. Michael's presence was almost palpable, even without direct eye contact. The air in the room seemed to thicken, pressing down on him. Most importantly, Michael said, his voice gaining a subtle emphasis, we must foster an environment of respect. Respect for the badge, respect for the law, respect for the community we serve, and critically, respect for one another. As he uttered those last words, Michael's gaze, which had been sweeping across the room, settled directly on Dave. It was a brief, almost imperceptible glance, devoid of malice or overt accusation, yet it pierced Dave like an icy needle. It was a look that acknowledged him, recognized him, and held him accountable without uttering a single word. It was a challenge, a promise, and a warning, all rolled into one silent moment. A hot flush crept up Dave's neck. He quickly averted his eyes, focusing on a loose thread on his uniform sleeve, but the image of Michael's steady gaze was burned into his mind. He knew with absolute certainty that Michael hadn't forgotten. Teamwork is not just a buzzword, Michael went on, his voice returning to its measured cadence, his eyes now sweeping over the rest of the room. It's the backbone of any effective force. We are stronger together. We will face challenges, we will make mistakes, but we will learn from them, and we will move forward as a united front. Ben, beside Dave, nodded enthusiastically, completely oblivious to the silent drama unfolding between his chief and his colleague. Elena, however, observed Michael with a sharp, discerning intensity, her lips pressed into a thin line. She seemed to be weighing every word, every gesture, trying to gauge the measure of this new chief. My door will always be open, Michael concluded, his voice softening slightly. I believe in open communication, in honest feedback, and in empowering each of you to excel. Let's work together to make this department a beacon of trust and efficiency for our community. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, a signal that his address was complete. A smattering of polite applause broke the silence. Dave joined in, his claps feeling hollow and forced. He kept his head down, waiting for the meeting to formally adjourn, desperate to escape the suffocating weight of Michael's presence and the crushing realization that his past was now his present, and very likely his future. The chief's office. The fluorescent hum of the precinct office seemed to amplify every shift in Dave's gut. Miller, my office, please. Chief Thompson's voice, a calm, even current, sliced through the morning's dull report murmur, sending a familiar schoolyard chill down Dave's spine. He pushed away from his worn desk, the faux leather groaning a protest, and trudged towards the chief's closed door. Each step weighted with the dread of impending judgment. His heart, a frantic drum solo against his ribs, surely broadcast his guilt to the entire station. A hesitant tap, then he waited. Come in, Dave, Michael's voice responded instantly, a flat, unreadable tone. The chief's office was surprisingly stark, a quiet counterpoint to the station's cluttered vibrancy. A large dark wood desk dominated the room, immaculately clear save for a neatly stacked pile of documents and a lone, polished silver pen. Behind it, Michael sat upright, his posture effortlessly authoritative, his dark eyes unwavering as they met Dave's. No personal touches softened the space, just a large city map on one wall and a framed commendation from the governor on another. The air felt cool, almost sterile, carrying a faint whisper of lemon polish. Dave lingered just inside the doorway, hands clasped awkwardly, searching Michael's face for any flicker of the animosity he'd braced for. He found only a measured neutrality, unnerving in its absence of emotion. Have a seat, Dave, Michael offered, gesturing to one of two visitor chairs opposite his desk. His voice, soft, almost conversational, nonetheless resonated with undeniable command. Dave sank into the plush seat, the sudden softness a jolt after his rigid walk. He tried to hold Michael's gaze, but his eyes kept drifting to the perfectly aligned edges of the papers on the desk. Michael leaned back slightly, his fingers steepled. "I wanted to talk to you about something, Dave," he began, his voice still even. "Something that goes beyond the immediate duties of our roles here." He paused, letting the words hang. A silent invitation for Dave's imagination to sprint through every possible permutation of disaster. Dave stiffened. This was it. The long-anticipated reckoning. He could almost taste the metallic tang of fear. "I believe in second chances, Dave," Michael continued, his voice calm. "And I believe that people can change. We all carry our pasts, some burdens heavier than others. But it's what we do with that weight that truly defines us." Dave's head snapped up, meeting Michael's eyes. He searched for sarcasm, a veiled threat, but found only quiet sincerity. This was not the confrontation he had meticulously rehearsed. "When I was younger," Michael went on, his gaze distant, as if recalling a faded photograph, "I encountered a fair share of unkindness. Like many of us, I learned early on that the world isn't always fair, and people aren't always gentle. But I also learned that bitterness is a heavy coat to wear. It weighs you down, makes you rigid." His gaze returned to Dave, a faint, almost imperceptible softening around his eyes. "I decided a long time ago not to carry that weight." Dave listened, the words seeping in, not as accusations, but as observations. He felt the phantom pressure of Michael's words, pressing down on the guilt that had been a dull, constant ache for years. Memories of scraped knees, textbooks tossed into puddles, taunts echoing in empty hallways, they resurfaced, sharp and clear. He recalled the cheap thrill of power, the hollow satisfaction of causing pain, and the emptiness that always followed. "Kindness, Dave," Michael said, his voice imbued with quiet conviction, "is not a weakness. It's a choice. It's a strength. It's about recognizing the humanity in everyone, even when it's difficult. Especially when it's difficult." He paused again, allowing the full import of his statement to settle. "And it's something I expect from every officer under my command, not just with the public, but with each other." Dave swallowed, his throat dry. He wanted to speak, to offer an apology, to explain the boy he had been, the man he was trying to become, but the words caught in his throat, choked by years of unspoken regret. Michael wasn't demanding an apology. He was offering a different path, an unexpected grace. "Our community needs officers who lead with empathy, who understand that every interaction has the potential to leave a lasting impact," Michael concluded, his voice unwavering. "I believe you have that capacity, Dave. I believe we all do." He leaned forward slightly, his gaze unwavering. "This department is going to be built on respect, integrity, and genuine service. And that starts with how we treat each other, every single day. Do you understand?" Dave nodded, a single jerky movement. The knot in his stomach had loosened, replaced by a strange cocktail of relief and a heavier, more profound sense of shame. Michael hadn't directly invoked the past, hadn't explicitly accused him, but his words, delivered with such calm authority, were a far more potent indictment. He hadn't just been called into the chief's office, he had been called to account, not by a vengeful victim, but by a man who chose compassion over retribution, a man who saw potential where Dave himself had only seen regret. "Good," Michael said, a faint, almost imperceptible nod. "That's all for now, Dave." Dave stood, feeling simultaneously lighter and burdened. He mumbled a thank you, though for what, he wasn't entirely sure. As he turned to leave, he felt Michael's gaze on his back, not accusatory, but watchful, a silent promise that the chief's words would echo long after the office door closed behind him. The reckoning had come, not as a storm, but as a quiet, insistent tide, slowly eroding the foundations of his carefully constructed peace. A second chance. Offered, Dave's palms grew slick, a cold echo of the churning in his gut. The chief's office, usually a bastion of polished order, now felt like a vice. Michael Thompson's earlier words, soft, yet profound, on kindness and absolution, still resonated, a stark counterpoint to the ugliness Dave carried. He swallowed, the bitter tang of old coffee coating his tongue. This moment transcended a mere traffic ticket. It was a lifetime of unaddressed shame finally demanding its due. "Chief," Dave began, his voice surprisingly steady, despite the tremor in his hands. I I need to confess something. He met Michael's gaze, finding not judgment, but a quiet, unwavering expectation that granted him a sliver of nerve. What I did to you in school, the things I said, the way I treated you, there's no excuse, none at all. The admission hung, thick and heavy, a ghost finally given substance. Dave shifted, the leather chair groaning beneath him. He could vividly recall a younger, smaller Michael flinching from a shove, eyes wide with incomprehension and hurt. The image, long suppressed, was now glaringly present, unforgiving. It was cruel. It was cowardly, and I've carried the shame of it for years, even if I never truly acknowledged it to myself, let alone to anyone else. He paused, fumbling for words that could bridge the chasm of his remorse. You didn't deserve any of it. No one does. I was a miserable kid, projecting my own insecurities onto you. And that's not an excuse, Chief, just context. It doesn't diminish the harm I inflicted. Dave's gaze dropped to his interlocked fingers. It's gnawed at me more profoundly than I ever let on. Every time I witnessed someone being bullied, every instance of unfair judgment, a part of me recalled what I'd done, and it invariably led back to you. He looked up again, his eyes earnest, vulnerable. I'm truly deeply sorry, Michael, for everything. Michael Thompson listened, his posture relaxed, his expression an unreadable canvas. He offered no interruption, no flinching, no empty reassurances. He simply absorbed Dave's heartfelt confession, a silent, attentive presence. The wall clock's ticking seemed amplified, marking the cadence of Dave's raw vulnerability. When Dave finally fell silent, the quiet stretched, dense, with unspoken history. Then Michael leaned forward slightly, hands resting on the desk. Dave, he said, his voice calm, even-keeled, I appreciate your candor. Truly, it takes a significant measure of self-awareness and courage to confront your past, especially when that past involves inflicting pain on another. His gaze was direct, unwavering. I remember. Of course I remember. Those experiences shape us, for better or worse. They can embitter us, or they can forge resilience. A faint, almost imperceptible nod. I chose resilience. I chose to believe that people can change, that understanding and empathy are more potent than resentment. He paused, allowing his words to settle. What you've just articulated, it sounds genuine. It sounds like you've been engaged in serious introspection, long before our paths converged again. Dave felt a fragile flicker of hope. Michael continued, his tone shifting, becoming more deliberate. My role here as chief is to cultivate an environment of trust, integrity, and mutual respect within this department. That applies to every officer, every staff member, and it certainly extends to our interactions with the community we serve. He met Dave's eyes again, a subtle intensity in his gaze. You expressed shame. That's a powerful emotion, Dave, but shame on its own isn't sufficient. It needs to be a catalyst for sustained change. It needs to fuel a commitment to acting differently, to being different. The air in the room seemed to thicken. This was the crux. I believe in second chances, Michael stated, his voice clear and firm. But a second chance isn't a gratuity. It's an opportunity that must be earned. It demands consistent effort, demonstrable growth, and a willingness to prove that the person standing before me today is not the same person who inflicted harm years ago. He leaned back, a thoughtful expression on his face. I'm offering you that opportunity, Dave, not because of our shared past, but despite it. I need to see that you can embody the values of compassion, fairness, and unwavering integrity that this department demands. I need to see it in your daily actions, in your interactions with your colleagues, and most importantly, in how you serve the public. Michael's gaze was piercing now, a quiet challenge. This isn't about erasing what happened. It's about building a new foundation, based on who you are now and who you commit to becoming. You have a chance to earn my trust, to prove not just to me, but to yourself, that you are capable of real transformation. The question is, Dave, are you willing to do the work? Dave took a deep breath, the accumulated weight of years beginning to recede. replaced by a new daunting responsibility. "Yes, Chief," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "I am." The path to redemption. The squad room, usually a cacophony of ringing phones and casual banter, felt different to Dave. Each morning, he walked in with a new resolve, a quiet determination that settled deep in his bones. The hollow ache of guilt still lingered, a phantom limb of his past, but now it was accompanied by a burgeoning sense of purpose. Michael's words, "genuine change," echoed in his mind, a constant mantra. Dave started with the basics. His patrol car, once an extension of his own weary indifference, became a meticulously organized workspace. Forms were filed promptly, reports submitted without a single typo. He volunteered for extra shifts, taking on the late-night calls and the tedious paperwork that others often shirked. There was a quiet intensity to his movements, a focused energy that hadn't been present in years. Sergeant Rodriguez, ever watchful, noticed the shift. Her eyes, usually narrowed with a critical appraisal, softened imperceptibly as she observed Dave. One Tuesday, she found him in the break room, not scrolling through his phone, but meticulously cleaning the coffee machine, a task usually reserved for the night shift. "Miller," she grunted, her voice a low rumble. "What's gotten into you? That machine hasn't seen a scrub like that since never." Dave looked up, a faint flush on his cheeks. "Just trying to do my part, Sarge. Figured it needed it." Rodriguez simply nodded, a flicker of something unreadable in her gaze before she turned and walked away. The incident, small as it was, settled in Dave as a tiny victory. His interactions with colleagues also underwent a transformation. Officer Ben Carter, perpetually optimistic and a bit of a chatterbox, was often the recipient of Dave's newfound kindness. Ben, still relatively new to the force, frequently fumbled with paperwork or struggled with the more nuanced aspects of community policing. Before, Dave would offer a curt correction or a dismissive wave. Now he took the time. One afternoon, Ben was wrestling with a particularly convoluted incident report. His brow was furrowed in concentration, his pen hovering uncertainly over the form. Dave, passing by, paused. "Having trouble, Carter?" he asked, his voice unexpectedly gentle. Ben looked up, startled. "Yeah, Miller. This property damage report is a nightmare. Neighbor disputes always get messy with the details." Dave pulled up a chair. "Let me take a look. Sometimes it helps to break it down. Who, what, when, where, why, then worry about the narrative." He guided Ben through the steps, patiently explaining each section, offering advice born of years of experience. Ben listened intently, his initial apprehension melting away. "Thanks, Miller," Ben said, genuinely grateful. "That actually makes a lot more sense. You really helped me out." Dave felt a warmth spread through him, a sensation far more fulfilling than the fleeting satisfaction of a perfectly executed arrest. It was a genuine connection, a small act of service that resonated deep within. The change wasn't just in overt acts of kindness or diligence, it was in the small, almost imperceptible details. Dave began to consistently follow department protocols, even the ones he previously considered trivial. His uniform was always immaculate, his equipment checked and double-checked. He made sure to log his vehicle's mileage accurately, to radio in his location even when he thought no one was listening. He stopped cutting corners, stopped making excuses. One evening, Sergeant Rodriguez conducted a random uniform inspection. Her eyes, sharp and discerning, swept over each officer. When she reached Dave, she paused. His boots were shined to a mirror polish, his badge gleaming, his sidearm securely holstered. She even checked the inside of his hat, something she rarely did. Finding nothing amiss, she gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Miller," she said, her voice devoid of its usual gruffness. "Good to see." It wasn't effusive praise, but from Rodriguez, it was high commendation. Dave felt a surge of quiet pride, a different kind of satisfaction than the empty bravado of his past. He wasn't doing it for applause, or even for Michael's immediate approval. He was doing it for himself, for the man he was trying to become. The path to redemption, he realized, wasn't a dramatic leap, but a steady, painstaking climb. One small, consistent step after another. Each act of kindness, each meticulously completed task, each rule upheld, was a brick laid in the foundation of his new self. He knew he had a long way to go, that trust, once broken, was not easily rebuilt. But as he walked out of the station that night, the city lights reflecting in the damp asphalt, he felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. The knowing misalignment was slowly, painstakingly, beginning to correct itself. He was finally trying to align his actions with the person he desperately wanted to be. And for the first time in a long time, the future, though uncertain, didn't feel entirely bleak. Trust begins to grow. The crisp snap of Chief Thompson's office door closing always preceded a shift in Dave's internal barometer. For weeks, these meetings had been routine, almost procedural. Updates on new initiatives, policy clarifications, the mundane rhythm of department administration. But lately, Dave noticed a subtle alteration in Michael's gaze. It wasn't the initial, almost clinical assessment he'd worn in their first few encounters, nor the quiet, watchful observation that had followed. Now, a flicker of something else resided there, a nuanced blend of curiosity and tentative acceptance. It began subtly, a nod of approval when Dave presented a meticulously detailed report on community outreach efforts, a brief, almost imperceptible smile when he recounted a positive interaction with a particularly challenging resident during his patrol. Michael, a man of few overtly demonstrative gestures, expressed his recognition through these understated signals, which, to Dave, resonated with the weight of mountains. Then came the assignments, not just the extra shifts he volunteered for, but tasks specifically routed his way. "Miller," Michael had said one Tuesday morning, his voice even, yet carrying a new timbre. "I need someone to oversee the implementation of the new digital forensic software. You've shown an aptitude for detail work." The words were simple, but the implication was profound. This wasn't a punishment or even a test, but an act of trust. Dave tackled the task with a singular focus that surprised even himself. He spent evenings poring over technical manuals, his kitchen table littered with diagrams and flowcharts, the scent of stale coffee a constant companion. He coordinated training sessions, patiently guiding colleagues through the intricate new interface, his explanations clear and concise. The quiet hum of the department's server room became a familiar comfort as he oversaw the system's integration, feeling a quiet satisfaction blossom with each successful deployment. He felt the shift most acutely in the day-to-day interactions. During morning briefings, Michael would occasionally direct a question to Dave, not to quiz him, but to solicit his input, his perspective. "Officer Miller, what are your thoughts on increasing foot patrols in the downtown district?" It wasn't a rhetorical question. Michael would listen intently, his gaze steady, considering Dave's points with genuine openness. One afternoon, Michael called Dave into his office. The air was still, save for the gentle whir of the air conditioning. Michael leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Miller," he began, his voice low, "the mayor's office is looking for a representative from the department to join the city's new youth engagement task force. It requires a significant time commitment and a certain sensitivity." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. Dave's heart hammered a slow, insistent rhythm against his ribs. This was a direct, public-facing role, an opportunity to directly shape community relations. It was a position of genuine influence. "I believe you'd be an excellent choice," Michael continued, his eyes meeting Dave's directly. There was no trace of the past in his gaze, only a clear, unwavering assessment of the present. "It requires someone who can build bridges, who understands the complexities of our youth." Dave swallowed, a lump forming in his throat. He thought of his early days, the casual disregard, the thoughtless cruelty he'd inflicted. The irony wasn't lost on him. Now, here he was, being asked to embody empathy, to foster connection. "Chief," he managed, his voice a little hoarse, I'd be honored." A faint, almost imperceptible softening touched the corners of Michael's mouth. "Good," he said, a note of quiet satisfaction in his tone. "The first meeting is next Tuesday. I'll forward you the details." Walking out of Michael's office that day, Dave felt a sensation he hadn't experienced in years, a quiet, sturdy sense of purpose. It wasn't the fleeting pride of a commendation or the brief adrenaline rush of a successful arrest. This was deeper, more resonant. It was the feeling of a seed taking root, of something meaningful beginning to grow, not just within him, but between him and Michael. The path to redemption was long, arduous, and often humbling, but with each new task, each new flicker of trust from Michael, Dave felt an undeniable current of hope. He wasn't just doing his job, he was rebuilding, brick by painstaking brick, not only his career, but his very sense of self. And in that rebuilding, he was beginning to see the outline of a future he hadn't dared to imagine. Earned respect. The precinct's familiar thrum, once a source of dread, now settled into a comforting rhythm. Dave moved with newfound ease, his steps assured, his gaze unwavering. He was en route to file a routine patrol report when Chief Thompson emerged from his office, a stack of folders tucked under one arm. Michael, meanwhile, was heading towards the conference room, likely for one of the interminable interdepartmental meetings that punctuated his demanding schedule. Their paths converged near the water cooler, a casual nexus for impromptu interactions. Dave offered a polite nod, a gesture of professional deference that now felt entirely natural, devoid of the initial awkwardness. Surprisingly, Michael paused. He returned the nod, but then a slow, genuine smile softened his features, crinkling the corners of his eyes. It was a warmth that transcended mere pleasantry, an unspoken acknowledgement. "Officer Miller," Michael's voice rumbled, low and steady, entirely free of past shadows. "A moment?" Dave stopped, a faint tremor of old anxiety stirring deep within him. He quelled it, reminding himself of his hard-won progress, the trust painstakingly rebuilt. He met Michael's gaze directly, ready for whatever lay ahead. Michael shifted the files, leaning casually against the wall. The rich aroma of fresh coffee from the break room mingled with the precinct's faint metallic tang. "I just wanted to say something," he began, his tone now softer, more personal. "I've been observing your work lately, the seamless software implementation, your contributions to the youth task force. It's been truly impressive." A warmth, like sunlight after a long winter, spread through Dave's chest. He hadn't anticipated such open, direct praise. He simply listened, a quiet pride blossoming within him. "You possess a remarkable knack for bridging divides," Michael continued, his eyes thoughtful. "Whether it's linking departments with new technology or connecting the force with the community's younger generation. That kind of aptitude, it's invaluable." He paused, letting his words resonate. "And your commitment, your dedication to improving things, it hasn't gone unnoticed." Dave swallowed, a lump forming in his throat. He wanted to articulate his gratitude, but the words felt inadequate, hollow against the weight of Michael's affirmation. Michael pushed off the wall, taking a step closer. His expression grew serious, yet still imbued with that underlying warmth. He placed a hand lightly on Dave's shoulder, a gesture of camaraderie that sent a subtle jolt through Dave's system. It was the touch of a colleague, a leader, but more profoundly, it felt like the touch of a man who truly saw him, not for who he had been, but for who he was now. "You're doing excellent work, Officer Miller," Michael said, his voice dropping to an almost confidential tone, his gaze holding a quiet intensity. "Truly excellent. Keep it up." The words lingered in the air, resonating with a profound significance that far surpassed their simple construction. "You're doing excellent work. Not 'you're trying' or 'you're improving', but an unequivocal validation, a stamp of approval from the very man whose past pain Dave had inflicted." As Michael continued towards the conference room, leaving Dave by the water cooler, a powerful cocktail of emotions washed over him. Relief, certainly, a freeing exhale of anxieties he hadn't realized he still carried. Gratitude, deep and humbling, for Michael's capacity for forgiveness and his unwavering belief in redemption. But more than anything, there was hope. A bright, burning ember, igniting a sense of purpose and belonging he hadn't felt in years. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sensation steep. He had confronted his demons, confessed his transgressions, and worked tirelessly to atone. And now, in this quiet, unassuming moment, he had been recognized. Not just for his efforts, but for his transformation. The warm feeling that filled his heart wasn't just hope. It was the comforting weight of earned respect, not just from Michael, but from himself. He had truly changed. The thought settled deep within him, a solid, undeniable truth. The gnawing misalignment that had plagued him for so long had finally been corrected. He was where he was meant to be, doing what he was meant to do. And for the first time in a very long time, Dave Miller felt genuinely, unequivocally good. The future, once a murky expanse of uncertainty and potential judgment, now shimmered with possibility, a testament to the power of a second chance, earned and cherished. He pushed off the wall, a distinct spring in his step, the precinct air feeling lighter, imbued with a fresh sense of purpose. He had a report to file, and then a youth engagement task force meeting to prepare for. And for the first time in his life, these tasks felt less like obligations and more like opportunities.